Alrighty, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing a how-to guide for people who have recently rediscovered reading. So this video was inspired by how many of the people in my non-booktube, like real life, have reached out to me in the past couple of years, especially since the start of the pandemic. I would say mostly because of that, and expressed interest in starting reading again. A lot of these people had stopped reading after high school, after doing the required reading for those years, or spark noting the reading for those years, and had really just kind of fallen off and didn't really have a passion for it, or lost the passion for it. And with all of us really being forced to slow down in our lives the past couple of years and, sit with ourselves at home and not being able to go out and engage in activities outside like we usually would have, a lot of people really started to go more internal and pick up, quieter hobbies that you can do by yourself, at home. And what better hobby matches those descriptions than reading? I've also noticed a lot of lifestyle vlogging channels just randomly coming out with a reading vlog. The most popular one is probably reading all of Colleen Hoover's books. I've seen so many random reading vlogs of people who usually don't read, binge reading all of Colleen Hoover's books, and they get bajillions of views. I'm not jealous or anything. But one thing I really did notice about those videos is in the comments there were a lot of people saying, I haven't read in such a long time, you're inspiring me to pick up a book again. And it just kind of heightened my sense of this general trend we're seeing, where reading might be kind of, cool again, something people want to engage with. And that inspired this video. And so I decided, based on this trend and this observation, that I wanted to make a video recommending a book to someone who doesn't usually read, based on the media they currently enjoy. Now, my first recommendation is one that I've heard some other people make this comparison before as well, but I think it is completely on point, which is if you are a fan of Marvel movies or the Marvel universe, you should pick up Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. Now, I don't know, you can only see a little bit of the white books up here, but all of the white books on the shelf behind the Hobbit here as well, these are all part of the Cosmere, as well as these hardbacks. These 4 hardbacks here are also part of the Cosmere. And essentially, the Cosmere is the same idea as the Marvel universe. Different stories, different worlds that have stories contained within them are connected on a larger scale in a larger universe. I don't want to go into too much detail in this video. I think that I could make a whole video just kind of talking about the Cosmere and, where I think you should start. That's actually a video that I'm thinking of making in the future, although there are a couple of those out there already. But an example of a series from the Cosmere would be Mistborn. This is where a lot of people start reading. This takes place on a world called Scadrial, and we follow, a whole set of characters here. This is Era 1, there's also Era 2. Then there are 2 installments which are currently standalones, but Brandon Sando has talked about, that he plans to make sequels to both of these, and that is Elantris and Warbreaker. Both of these deal with different worlds and planets besides the one that's in Mistborn, and a different cast of characters, and different magic systems as well. And then finally, the biggies that you see behind me. This is kind of like the crowning jewel of the Cosmere, and that is the Stormlight Archive. Now, all of these books are big and heavy, so I will not be picking them all up, but the first one is The Way of Kings. And this, like I said, is kind of the crowning jewel of the world, in that the depth and breadth of this series is beyond the other installments in the Cosmere, and this is the series that really starts to bring all of the disparate parts together. There are also tons of novellas in between the larger installments in the series, as well as short story collections that have stories that are from the Cosmere, like the ones in Arcanum Unbounded. So if you're the type of person who loves the Marvel idea of different magic systems and powers coming together across worlds, you're going to love the Cosmere. And there's so much material to dive into that there's no way you're going to get bored. Sanderson also writes at inhuman speed, so, you're always going to have new content to pick up and to enjoy, just like you do with Marvel. My next recommendation is going to be if you enjoy period dramas. Now, I haven't seen Bridgerton, but the vibes are like Pride and Prejudice, Bridgerton. If you enjoy those kinds of dramas, then I would recommend that you pick up the Memoirs of Lady Trent. I've recently talked about this series quite a bit because I just completed a read-along with a couple other booktubers for this entire series, and I adored it. It's basically if Jane Austen met Indiana Jones in a very light fantasy world, and it's amazing. We follow our main character, Lady Trent, in the first book as she becomes enamored with dragons, which in this world are not like the dragons you would imagine from like Game of Thrones or typical fantasy dragons. They are animals, they're creatures that are, apex predators in this world that are to be studied. And she becomes obsessed with them and learning about them and the world of science. And during the time in which she lives, which is basically Victorian times, this is not considered ladylike. It is not considered something that she's supposed to want to do. And while the later, installments in the series really expand on this idea, the first installment really focuses on her starting this journey. And as such, it really focuses on the society in which she's brought up. So if you like period dramas where they really focus on society at the time, and, have humorous situations that come out of that, you will enjoy Lady Trent. I can almost guarantee it. The other book that I would recommend if you are into period dramas is Lovely War. This is a standalone, so you don't have to pick up more than one book, but it is a fantastic read. We follow two different perspectives. One is from the view of the Greek gods, Aphrodite is caught cheating on her husband, and they have to go to trial for this. So we have that one perspective of Aphrodite being on trial, and then the other perspective is a human love story that she's telling to the other gods, and we're experiencing it in real time in the other perspective. This book takes place during World War I, in like the 1920s, where these two human lovers first see each other and encounter each other. And while this is a love story, it also takes a lot of time to talk about the period in which it takes place and how that environment affects the lives of those, in the story. And having that juxtaposed with just a little sprinkling of Greek gods was a really interesting touch on a historical fiction book, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who enjoys those types of period dramas. My next recommendation is going to be for those of you who enjoy slice of life anime or manga. Slice of life basically focuses on the daily life of the characters. There's not some grand adventure going on. There's not, the world is not at stake, but it's more about the daily lives of the characters. And of course, as a character-based reader, I was a huge fan of this kind of genre of anime and manga when I was younger and even to this day. So if that's your jam, I highly recommend picking up, which I bet you everyone in the comments is going to be able to guess what I'm about to say, Legends and Lattes. Legends and Lattes is a cozy fantasy book that took the fantasy world, and even outside of the fantasy booktube world, by storm as soon as it was released. We follow our main character, Viv, who is an orc, who previously did what orcs usually do. Basically, fighting, plundering. She was a mercenary, essentially, and she's tired of that life. And we start this book where she decides to retire and open up a coffee shop. It is delightful, it is a warm hug of a book, and it's going to give you those slice of life feelings. It's got cleaning scenes, and when you're building a new thing for yourself and you're building a relationship with the people around you at the same time. It's got those like slow moments as well that a lot of people love who enjoy slice of life. There's also a lot of good dry humor and wonderful side characters in the story. Another book that I would recommend if you're a slice of life person is With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. Now hear me out. This is typically seen as more hard-hitting contemporary, and it does deal with heavier themes, don't get me wrong. But I do think that it has that kind of, that touch, that slice of life touch that is missing from some other contemporaries. Our main character in the story is a very young mother, and while that is a huge aspect of her life and her story, there's so much love between her and her daughter, and it's beautiful to read. So if you like that like cozy feeling, that cozy family feeling, there's so much love between her and her little girl and her grandmother that gives you kind of the warm fuzzy vibes that I think a lot of people enjoy, you know, if you're into those types of stories. She's also learning to be a chef, so there's lots of cooking scenes, or, you know, thinking about how to make a certain recipe, or the smell and the taste of food, where you really just sit and enjoy those moments with the characters. So I think that that's another aspect that people would really enjoy if you're coming from that type of manga or anime. The romance is also really cute and good for your soul. My next recommendation is going to be if you like political dramas. If you like the very backstabby, intricate plot lines of political factions warring against each other, and the idea of like soft power, you know, running the scenes, like behind the scenes, if you really like those types of vibes, I highly, highly, highly recommend the Greenbone Saga. These are out of order. Hold on. The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. The first one is Jade City, the second one is Jade War, and the third one is Jade Legacy. So the first one, Jade City, focuses more on a smaller scale. It talks about one particular city, if you couldn't guess. The city of Janlun in Kekkon. And essentially our three main characters are mob bosses, gang bosses in this city. And while this book does have a smaller, more focused scope, you really get to understand the inner workings of Janlun and how the clan, which is the name of basically the gang in this world, how this clan and the other clans in the city are necessary to its functioning, to its survival. And how that core integration then causes issues when we get to Jade Legacy and Jade War. These books expand to the greater world and have Janlun and our characters engaging with different political systems, different goals from around the world. One of the main aspects of this series is Jade, which is not only the source of the magic in this world, although it's very light magic, so if you're not a magic person, don't worry, it's not overwhelming, but it is the source of magic in this world, and it's also a commodity that can be used to make money and to give political power to those who wield it. Fonda Lee does an incredible job of blending all of these different elements together, and the finale, Jade Legacy, is still one of the best final books I've read in a trilogy, I think, ever. It's top 3. I love this book. This series is phenomenal. So if you like political fantasy or intrigue, or even if you're looking to get into more complicated fantasy, if you're like a more simple story fantasy reader right now and you're looking to up your game, this series, for the love of God, pick up this series. It needs an adaptation, and it needs it like yesterday. What is my hair doing? My next recommendation is going to be if you loved Game of Thrones, if you really enjoyed the show. Now, I'm not talking about the way the show ended. That is universally hated. I am part of that. We can go off on that all day. But if you liked the show when it was good, when it was at its best, the first 4 to 6 seasons, then I've got 2 great recommendations for you. The first one is going to be The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. Now, I do physically have these books elsewhere, so I can't hold them up, which is a shame because they're absolutely stunning. This is a large-scale, extremely detailed world that covers a large swath of time, and thus is able to really explore the themes of violence and war over periods of time, and how those things shift and change depending on who's in power. And not only are those themes similar to Game of Thrones, but the character work is just... I cannot give you an example of better character work in high epic political fantasy. And the way that they're written is so detailed and intricate that you can follow the logical progression of all of their choices over the span of time. So even if you skip a bunch of years, it makes sense where the characters are, where the world is now, because you know these characters so well, and it makes sense that they made those decisions while off the page, if that makes sense. The Dandelion Dynasty starts in the first book with The Grace of Kings, where we follow 2 main characters, Kuni and Mata Zindu. And both of them are very, very different characters. Kuni's basically like a con man. He's like a lovable con man type of character. And Mata Zindu is a very disciplined, strong, morally centered character. And those are just the two main characters, but there are so many side characters and plots and people who have a stake in this story. But those two main characters end up coming together, and it's about their relationship between the two of them, of course, but also how their friendship affects the world around them and leads to large-scale ripples of change. When we start this story, there is an oppressive empire that is ruling over the entire country. And we follow, again, these small choices made along the way by people who end up having large-scale changes on the political sphere. This is also an Asian-based fantasy, just as the Greenbone saga is as well. And the nuance and detail put into the culture of this world is mind-blowingly good. So if you love morally gray, complicated characters duking it out over a large-scale political war, or just war overall, you have to read this series. You have to. It is with the Greenbone saga as the tippy top of my favorites. The other series that I would recommend is the Gunmetal Gods series by Zelma Akhtar. These are a little less of the large scale, but the character work and the themes dealt with, the perpetual cycle of violence and the futility of it all, is very deeply delved into in the series, along with a heavy dose of Lovecraftian, like cosmic horror. And it's so good. I love this series so much. It's a Middle Eastern-based fantasy, the first one being Gunmetal Gods, the second one being Conqueror's Blood, and the third one being Death Rider. This is just factually incorrect. I don't know why I said Death Rider was the third one in the series. Maybe I was going by publication order, but Death Rider is actually a prequel novella to Gunmetal Gods. So basically for Gunmetal Gods, we follow two main characters, Micah and Kiva. Micah is a religious zealot who has raised a religious army behind him to attack a nation who he believes stole his daughter. And then we have Kiva, who is from the nation that Micah is attacking, but he is kind of a washed-up has-been. He's already done his heroic deeds, he's out of shape, he's retired, and he's not interested in coming back into like that hero dynamic. Imagine Thor, from the later Avengers movies. That's Kiva's vibe. But then his Shah calls him to service and says, I need you to come back to help me out here. And he comes out of retirement, reluctantly so. And these two men, they're two different storylines, their timelines, merge in really interesting and fascinating ways. And like I said earlier when I was talking about the series as a whole, there is a huge element of Lovecraftian cosmic horror in this series that is wonderfully written. It's fascinating. But the themes of war and violence and the cyclical nature of it all is very deeply handled in this book. It'll make you think about your own moral compass, because you'll find yourself sympathizing with a character who's done horrendous things on the previous page, and yet on the next page you're like, but I see the logic to your next decision. So you find yourself understanding characters that you don't really want to understand, in the same way that Game of Thrones does that for you. So if you enjoyed Game of Thrones and those kinds of elements to the storytelling, I really think you're going to enjoy Gunmetal Gods. This video is getting a bit longer than I expected, which I guess is kind of usual on my channel. I guess I just always have a lot to say. So what I'm going to do is actually split this into two sections. So this will be section 1. I have a lot of other recommendations for those who enjoy documentaries, who enjoy horror movies, who enjoy true crime, those of you who enjoy sci-fi. I just have a lot of ideas for recommendations that I will be doing in part 2, so please stay tuned for that. I also have a series called So You Want to Read Fantasy, which is targeted towards people who are already readers but in different genres and they're interested in getting into fantasy. I go through all the different genres and I give both a YA and an adult recommendation for every different genre that I could possibly think of. I have a part 1 and a part 2 for that, but I still stand by all of those recommendations. So if you're already a reader and you're curious how to get into fantasy, please go check those videos out. I'll put a card up above and I'll have it linked in the description down below. I hope these recommendations are helpful for those trying to get back into the world of reading. Welcome back. Let me know in the comments down below if this convinced you to pick up some of these, or if you're a reader and have other recommendations based on the media that I talked about in this video. Leave those down below so someone watching might get some other recommendations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!